Get yourself in the lotus position, because I've got no plan, no pretense, and definitely no bypassing. I'm Josh Connolly, and this will probably be dysfunctional. I promised you, and I've always said that I would turn up in, try and give you a bit more of the real me. So today I am feeling a level of, it was interesting actually. Some people would say I'm just calm and relaxed. When I'm calm and relaxed, it comes with a level of angst, and I'm like, shit, what's going on? Why am I so calm and relaxed? And then I've got a little bit of a headache as a result of that, which is kind of ironic, actually, because we're going to be talking about highly sensitive people today. And I would argue that if you're an avid listener of this podcast or regular listener, or you're into any of the content that I do in any way, I would argue that you probably are somewhere on that continuum of having a high level of sensitivity. And I'll kind of get into why I believe that in a minute, but let's take, and that's going to be today's subject. We're going to talk about highly sensitive people, get into some of the history of it, how the term came about, why it's here, and then talk about some of my experiences with it and some of my learnings with it over the years. And then I've got a couple of questions. A couple of people have asked some quite deep questions around the normal stuff that I talk about. So we'll get into that, and I'll share and I'll do some of them. You're always welcome to ask questions on Instagram. I add them to the list, and then I answer as many as I can here or in other ways in content online. But I just thought before we start today, I was going to do it before I hit play, and then I thought, why not do it together? Let's just take 3 really deep breaths, okay? The way I want you to do this, if you can breathe through your nose, a nice deep breath in through your nose, and then a nice elongated exhale. So wherever you're listening to this, unless you're well, you can do it when you're driving. Just 3 deep breaths. You can take deep breaths, right, while you're driving. We're only doing 3. So just nice deep breath in through the nose, and then a nice elongated exhale. So we're going to start now. And in. And in. Good. And just notice if there's any different feeling in you. I feel a little bit more relaxed now. And there's always, by the way, I always get a better reaction to that style of breathing if I feel like I'm doing it with people. So the fact that I was doing that live on film here and knowing that I'm doing it with people and it's not going to be edited and all of that makes me lean into it more. Why would that be? I'm not really sure why that is, but like if I do those 3 breaths on my own, which I do, by the way, they just don't have as much impact. Why is that? I don't know. Maybe it's because we're social beings. And we're social creatures, and I believe we're supposed to do things in community. I really do believe that. I really do believe. I mean, I know I've done an episode on community, but I think that community should be in the heart of everything that we do. I don't think it is enough at the heart of everything that we do. So yeah, I wanted to get into talking about highly sensitive people. Let me just start by saying I made a bit of a claim here that I can't really back up with any studies or anything like that. But what I do believe is that if you're kind of looking at your trauma, or you're looking at the things that you experienced when you were a child and you're kind of working through them, and you feel like there's a level of healing that you need to do, then I feel like there's probably a level of sensitivity in you to have picked up what you experienced when you were younger. I think that sensitivity is one of the big genetic factors that plays a big role. Now, if you're listening to this, a lot of people will go, yeah, but do you think sensitivity is genetic, or do you think it's environmental? I'm going to talk about that today. I'm going to talk about what I believe about it. I think there's a misunderstanding of what sensitivity is, and I think sometimes that we hold on to the negative parts of sensitivity, and we think, oh, that's what our sensitivity is. But sensitivity is absolutely a superpower that you can tap into. You just need to fully You need to understand it better. That doesn't mean that it will never cause you issues or it won't still be a struggle, but it does mean that you can live with it very differently. And I've certainly done that myself. But to come back to what I was saying about why I think you've probably experienced it, I think sensitivity is a factor in a lot of things. I think it's a factor in, if you've got siblings, why you might have experienced your childhood different to them. Now, of course, we know that toxic or dysfunctional parents often treat their kids differently within a dysfunctional family environment, that we often take on roles. I would argue that the sensitivity that you experience would play a role in which one of those roles you end up taking on. But with a lot of like dysfunction, with a lot of even abuse and toxicity, a lot of what we're talking about goes on underneath the surface. It's like the feelings and the behaviors that surround it. So if you take something like an alcoholic parent, for example, it's not like what causes you the most struggles, or the thing that you need to heal from the most when you're an adult, is not necessarily the horrible things that they did when they were drunk. Although you can see them, and though you do definitely need to do some healing from them, and they would have caused you trauma, and they would have been traumatic, and I'll get into the difference of those two things in a minute. In some ways, they're kind of obvious. So the domestic violence that I witnessed as a child when I was a kid, the domestic violence that I witnessed is pretty obvious now as an adult when I look back with my rational brain, that was awful, that was problematic, that would have caused me trauma and would have been traumatic, right? As I've said. So by the way, not necessarily always as obvious as you think. You still need to do a little bit of work to get there, but it's sort of more clear. The real deep stuff that you have to do a lot of work around is the behaviors and the feelings and the stuff that goes on just below the surface that happened when you were a child. That's the stuff that I've really needed to do some healing from, right? The subtle kind of blames that happen, or the subtle kind of manipulation of the emotional experience that you would have had when you were a child. Both abusive manipulation and manipulation is manipulation, right? But when I'm trying to separate the two types of manipulation, you've got kind of this, I'm manipulating you to try and hurt you kind of thing, to control and hurt you. Then you've got this people-pleasing manipulation is a different example, right? Where you're trying to get people to love you, but you're still trying to manipulate them, right? You're still trying to get them to see you in a different way, and you're going to ultimately potentially still hurt them. So they both come from similar places, but this is what I mean, right? We're getting into the crux of it already. There's these kind of like under the surface difficult experiences that you have when you're a child that like if you don't have a level of sensitivity, or you have much less of a level of sensitivity, you might not have picked up on them. And so your experience may, and I don't want to diminish anybody's experiences here, but your experience may have been slightly easier to navigate as a child if you weren't picking up on those things all of the time. And I have a sense and a knowing now that though I don't necessarily always remember, and we'll talk about this in a second, don't necessarily always remember the things that I experienced when I was a child, knowing my level of sensitivity now, and then looking back over the things that I definitely would have experienced, though I might not be able to fully remember, I can absolutely see that my childhood, in many ways, particularly those initial years, would have had a huge, huge impact on who I become. And one of the parts of the healing that I think everybody should do is hypothesize. So if today as an adult, as a 37-year-old man that I am in my life today, if I know that when in my family home at home, by the way, for example, if I know that I can feel that I'm picking up on all of the tension, I live in a blended family. So I have me and my wife. There's children that live in our house from my previous marriage. There's a children that me and my wife have together. So there's these different kind of relationships that are going on that have their own complexities in there. So there's complexities and complications that come with that, many of which we don't really talk about as a society. So they sort of go on underneath the surface. I'm overly in tune with them if I'm not careful. I take responsibility for the kind of disturbances that might be going on between the different family members. So if I can see that, that's a whole nother conversation, by the way, but if I can see that, it's still part of sensitivity. But if I can see that as an adult in my adult life today, then I can hypothesize that my dad being an alcoholic, there was times when the police turned up at the house and things like that. I may not always clearly remember them, but I can hypothesize that even at the age of 2, take a 2-year-old baby who sits up in the way that they were and sees things in the way that they were, that would have had a different impact on me than other people who potentially are not as in tune with that. You know, when I'm out on a social event and I'm picking up on stuff, not everybody around me is picking up on it. And we're going to talk about that later and why I think it's important to understand that you can navigate that stuff slightly differently to what you might be doing. And then just quickly, I said I'd come back and talk about the trauma and the difference between trauma and traumatic. I don't know why I keep saying traumatic like that, because I want to highlight that I'm talking about traumatic and trauma and them being two different things. People will often say, my trauma, and then you say, what was your trauma? And then they'll talk about the incident that happened to them. What I would encourage you to try and do is look at that differently and go, so that was traumatic. So the domestic violence, let's say there was one time that I actually remember when my dad had smashed some windows through in the house and the police had turned up and taken him away. That's not my trauma. That was traumatic. The trauma is the message and the messaging, the internal messaging and the way that would have shaped me. Yeah. So that would have shaped me one way, right? That experience in and of itself would have had an impact and shaped me one way. But in a different environment, if we were able to all talk about that openly and freely, then afterwards everybody would have said, this must be really difficult, you didn't cause this, it wasn't your fault, this must have been really hard, let's talk about your emotions, let's release them, let's just help you understand why your dad did that, what was the experience was behind that, understand the level of trying to sweep it under the rug, all of that. Yeah, so the trauma comes from the messaging that comes from behind that, and that's why the trauma is the bit that becomes really difficult to heal from. And that's why when you look at a scenario like that with my dad, rationally as an adult, when I sit down, I can go, yeah, that must have been scary, that must have been horrible, it must have been really bad. But then when you start to get into the complexities of some of these conversations, and then you start going, well, if you look at the behaviors and the secrecy and everything that surrounded that, so then you go into the idea that like when dad wasn't, or there wasn't domestic violence, but he was clearly drunk, and like I was picking up on the fact that my mum was clearly worried about it, and then she was trying to make sure that I wasn't worried. So I was trying to make sure to show her that I wasn't worried because I didn't want her to worry about me. And then so I'm worried about how much that my dad's drinking and da-da. So then you look at that all becomes harder to describe, because the instance and the situation that I'm describing there to look at may have just been all sat in the living room watching TV, nothing actually going on. And in that moment, if I'd have said, what's going on? Why is everybody upset? I probably wouldn't have been given the truth. And so then I would have been questioning what's going on. Why am I feeling like this? Why do I pick up on things differently? So if you have a level of sensitivity and you've grown up in any kind of dysfunction, what I've just said will make sense to you. So I thought it was just worth highlighting that. And when I discovered the term highly sensitive person, and I've discovered lots of terms over my life, right? Lots of terms that I feel like describe me, and then I feel like I outgrow them. And this happens with any label that I pick up. Even let's start when I was 24 and I got sober, and obviously I knew the term alcoholic, but I was like, okay, I believe that I'm an alcoholic. That's a term that I set for me. As happens a lot, and I think we all see this with when people pick up labels for themselves, when they pick up a way of describing their distress that makes sense and seems to describe everything that they never fully understood, it then becomes a little bit of an identity. So I did it with being an alcoholic, right? I was like, yes, I'm an alcoholic. And then everything that I did, I was like, well, that's just because of my the way that I think, because I'm an alcoholic. And of course I'm like that, it's because I'm an alcoholic. And then slowly over time, you sort of feel like I like outgrow that a bit. And it's not that I still wouldn't class myself as an alcoholic. I just don't believe that every single one of my personality traits is tied into the fact that I'm an alcoholic. I've sort of outgrown that. And I've done that with other terms as well. Empath, which is one that I really want to get into to talking about most importantly today, because I think it really, really highlights this. But when I found this term, it's one that stuck and that I still truly relate to. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, right? By the way, my opinion, when I have an opinion on something that I'm not backing up, I think it's real. I've been having some debates on LinkedIn this week. My opinion being different to yours, or me seeing my experience as different to the way that you see your experience, doesn't have to be me attacking your experience. I can be sharing my experience and it could help shape yours or not. All right. I think particularly when we're talking about how we frame our experiences when there's no physical markers for that, I think it's important. But the term highly sensitive person, I feel, this is my opinion that I was coming to, by the way, before I went off down that rabbit hole. I feel like it's like a bit of an umbrella term. I think a lot of kind of other labels, and I would argue some of the disorders and things like that, I think some of them can be traced back to this top line high level of sensitivity. And then I think the environmental and social factors that I experienced with my sensitivity then shaped that sensitivity into a certain kind of personality trait. Now, that is a massive oversimplification, of course, of what happens. But I believe that there's something in that. And again, by the way, that is just a reflection. That is just an opinion that's not based on anything other than reviewing my own personal experience and what resonates with me. But I came across it. It comes from the psychologist, Dr. Elaine Aron, who researched sensory processing sensitivity in the 90s. I've got some, where's my deep research on it? So she found that 15 to 20% of the population has the trait, meaning they experience heightened sensitivity to their environment, emotions, and sensory input. This is not a disorder, it's simply a neurological trait that shapes how someone experiences the world. It's interesting that it says it's not a disorder. I mean, it's a group of people that get to decide what is a disorder anyway. So maybe I'm probably drawn to it as well, because I don't like the term disorder. All right, I just don't like it. Even when I look at like ADHD, like I don't like saying that you're disordered because your personality, because your neurological trait or your neurological type is in a world that's not built for it. I think we should call the fucking society disordered and call you like attention deficit response or something like that. I just don't like the term disorder. And when you look at like sensitivity to environment, emotions, and sensory input, like listen, this is where I do go a little bit woo-woo, right? What some might think is woo-woo. When you get to the high top end level of that sensitivity, there's a recent podcast that I listened to called it was about autistic people and having the telepathy tapes. Go and have a listen to it if you haven't listened to it. But that was talking about how they have like even telepathic abilities within their level of sensitivity. When I look at my own level of sensitivity, and I don't talk about this publicly because I think people just start to think that you're crazy. Like when it's really in tune and really in flow, I mean, telepathy doesn't feel too far, like beyond the realm of possibility to me. When you get to that real high level of sensitivity, especially, so I'm really in tune with emotions. I get I believe that in the company of people, I can sometimes pick up on what they're feeling before they've even recognized what they're feeling. Like I really believe that. I have sensory as well. So people always joke that I'm always wearing shorts and they're like, oh, you don't feel the cold. And I'm like, no, I do feel the cold. The reason I always wear shorts is because I would rather be cold than deal with the sensory issue of material on my legs all of the time. you'll see I'm wearing a hoodie with a zip on. I don't like wearing, I mean, I do, I push myself to do it, but I don't like wearing jumpers and stuff without a zip on because I can't have them on my neck. The idea of wearing a scarf just makes me want to die. Yeah, that thing. I'm doing it with my teeth. You can see that feeling. Doing this with my hands. It makes my skin crawl. There's certain materials that I see, and I'm like, oh my god, don't let me come near it. And then I'm sensitive to light, so I have to have these lights on, obviously here for while we're recording, and I do a lot of that. But I have the light right down on my phone. I'd wear sunglasses 24/7. I often wear sunglasses when I'm on the tube in London, for example, because it's overstimulating enough with all of that kind of stuff going on. And sunglasses is one of my way to kind of dub down and dull the light. So next time you see somebody wearing sunglasses inside, and you think they're an idiot, or you want to have a pop at them, just remember that they might be doing it because of that. It's interesting, isn't it? Right? Lots of music artists, you'll often see them wearing sunglasses indoors, and everybody's like, oh, they're wearing sunglasses indoors, trying to be cool and all that kind of stuff. I would argue that creative people are by definition sensitive. They have a level of sensitivity. So it makes sense that a lot of music artists end up wearing sunglasses indoors because they're overstimulated. They've become famous, so everybody's looking at them. And so the sunglasses become a bit of a protection thing. Like, that makes perfect sense to me. And if they can make it look cool, then happy days. I don't think I make it look cool on the tube. Although part of me would say that I fucking do. So yeah, like I say, I can be very sensitive to the light, and I'm sensitive to certain sounds as well. I'm sure my boy won't mind me saying he can't listen to cutlery go together. Ting, 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 the thing of cutlery. That doesn't get me. But there are certain noises that get me going. So the key characteristics of HSPs, highly sensitive people, include deep processing, thinking deeply before making decisions, relaying conversations in their head, and absorbing more information more intently. That's definitely something that I do. Like, it can fall into rumination, which then becomes massively problematic. But I will often not do something until it's settled in me. Sometimes I have to let things settle. I'm like, let it settle. Let's let it settle, and then I'll think energetically when I intuitively feel we're ready to go with that. Then I'll do that. But again, that, like I say, there's a line here where that becomes obsessively ruminating on things, which is problematic in itself. Overstimulation, so being easily overwhelmed by loud noises, strong smells, bright lights, and chaotic environments. Strong smells is massive for me. Like, anybody that knows me, I'm really into scents. I'm at, like, perfume and stuff like that. I can pick it out when I'm on a tube or when I'm around people, and I find it really hard to not go to comment on it. And then this kind of chaotic environments, one of the ways that I've always dealt with my sensitivity to environments is to take control of them. So that's why I always lead in rooms. That's why I always have been an attention seeker. I think it's important for people to understand that. If you're a teacher and somebody in your class is always an attention seeker, put me in a classroom. When I was a kid, they normally sat me at the front because I was naughty, and that's why I was better off there. So now I've got a whole room of people behind me. There's noises and things going on, and I'm picking up on all of it, and I'm not able to read the room, which makes me feel very out of control, very overstimulated. So it's natural that I keep turning around, keep being stupid, and try and get everybody's attention in the class so that I can lead it. It's no coincidence that I've become an expert at keeping people's attention or keeping the focus on me being an attention seeker, because it's how I deal with it. People go, when I go and do a talk, I might be on stage in front of hundreds of people, and before I go out there, people go to me, are you nervous? And I'm like, I'm nervous when you put me out there and in amongst all of those people. The moment I get on stage and I get their full attention and now it's all on me, I'm not nervous anymore because I've got the control. I'm in control of the room. But that same crowd, when I finish the talk and I go out there, it's a little bit easier because I feel like most people are then approaching me to discuss what I've just said. But put me in that same group of people as just anybody else in that room, I'm fucking... the thought of it makes me feel awkward and anxious. Emotional intensity, so feeling emotions more deeply than the average person, sometimes to the point of exhaustion. I've talked regularly. Go back and listen to previous podcasts to me. I've talked regularly in the past. I find life exhausting. I find the world exhausting. I find the fact that I feel things so deeply all of the time so exhausting. It can be so hard. I sometimes wish that I didn't feel things as deeply as I did. I wish that I could just switch off and get on with my life. And like, you know, I sometimes wonder, well, like, what are you feeling? Like, if like, I don't like when people say I don't really feel, I'm not feeling anything at the moment. I know when I was numb and disconnected, I understand that happens, but I'm just so feel things so deeply all the time. It's both a gift and a curse, you know. And I often say like things like, you know, I wouldn't swap with anybody, and that's true when I'm feeling something deeply that I really want to feel that's good, but it's not always the case, man. It's fucking hard. It's hard. Heightened empathy, it says here. We're going to talk about this. Shall we talk about it now? Maybe we'll get there yet. Heightened empathy, being highly attuned to other people's feelings, often absorbing their emotions like a sponge. And then it says sensitivity to subtleties, picking up on small changes in their surroundings, from tiny shifts in someone's mood to subtle differences in light or sound. The tiny shifts in somebody's mood, before you become aware of it, it's really hard. It can be really, really exhausting, because when you're around somebody, you might, like I say, be able to pick up on the fact that their mood has changed before they've even picked up on it. So if you're in a relationship and you're not very good at controlling that and disconnecting yourself from that, as in separating your emotions from their emotions, then you might have lived a lot of like, what's wrong? What have I done? Is it me? What can I do? How can I make you feel better? You start taking responsibility for that all of the time. Yeah. I just wanted to read a couple more things before I'm going to get into the pros and cons of it. And that's when I'll talk about the empath stuff. Highly sensitive people traits aren't just psychological, they're biological. Studies suggest that sensory processing sensitivity is partly genetic, meaning some people are simply wired to be more sensitive from birth. I genuinely believe that to be the case for me. I don't believe that I was born with the same level of sensitivity as everybody else, right? I just don't believe that. Though I do believe that my experiences have definitely molded and shaped that. Interestingly, and this is what I found super interesting when I first found out about it years ago, the trait is not unique to humans, right? This is what really does for me cement the idea that it can be biological. Many animal species also display high sensitivity as a survival mechanism. Aaron and her husband, Dr. Arthur Aaron, I hope I'm saying the name right, studied how sensitivity shows up in nature. In certain species, subset of the population is more cautious, observant, and responsive, which is a really lovely way of putting it. It's interesting that we do that with animals, right? That they're more cautious, observant, and responsive to environmental changes. This allows them to detect threats early, helping the whole group to survive. So when you see that, in that respect, they're learners, and this is what I thought was interesting to talk about it. When we look at highly sensitive people from an evolutionary perspective, in early human societies, highly sensitive people likely played a critical role as watchers, people who sensed danger before others did. Their deep empathy would have made them key figures in maintaining group harmony and relationships. Their sensitivity to detail would have helped in areas like gathering food, tracking patterns in nature, and anticipating changes in the environment. While non-highly sensitive people may have been more action-orientated or impulsive, highly sensitive people were likely reflective leaders, healers, and advisors with their communities. And then it says, however, in today's fast-paced, overstimulating world, the once beneficial trait can feel more like a burden. Modern society often favors resilience, quick decision-making, and an emotional detachment, things that don't come naturally to highly sensitive people. See, this is where it comes back to why I don't particularly like labeling people as disordered, because it's no longer a beneficial trait, because modern society wants us to be quick decision makers, have emotional detachment so we can get on and kind of drive forward with the capitalistic sense of society that we live in. I'd also argue that our traits of being reflective leaders, healers, advisors, good at watching, good at being able to hold space for people to really reflect into them. I don't know how to say this without any arrogance, but like when I come to sessions with people, like what I'm doing is not scientific, right? It's more of like, let me really use that sensitivity to feel and lean into how and what you need me to be in order for me to be able to hold you in a space that makes you feel comfortable. Because we can't really measure that. We live in a very materialistic world now. It's kind of just fobbed off as being like woo-woo and all of that kind of stuff. So like the resulting struggles that we have as highly sensitive people, I do believe, can then sometimes go on to be labeled as disordered, when actually it's not me, you, or the individual that is disordered. It's simply in an environment that doesn't understand the fucking qualities of a highly sensitive person. So I'm going to read, no, I'm not going to read that bit. It's evolved over the years. I wanted to get to the pros and cons. Yeah, I'm not going to go through some of the stuff that I wrote there. Where are the pros and cons? So the strengths. The pros, we've got deep empathy and emotional intelligence. Like, I definitely see now that one of the big things is that I have a high level of empathy. I'm really able to kind of lean into you, and when I can use that to be able to be with you and to be able to hold you and to be able to help you experience your experience, it's a hugely powerful tool. Now, the flip side of that is, by the way, that is so exhausting and can become so draining that you end up not doing it, and you end up just sort of just shutting off and being completely disconnected from it, which is like problematic in itself. And I have to get the balance right when I look at like my kind of family life of making sure that I don't do all the empathy holding space stuff during my work life and then don't save any of it for the people that, you know, that matter to me the most. And that can cause problems because I can sometimes be in my home and day-to-day life depleted as a result of the empathy that I've given in the work that I do. Yeah. Heightened intuition is one of the powerful strengths. So the ability to be able to see things that other people do. This is why, by definition, I say that creative people are sensitive. Music, art, they have that sensitivity where they're able to pick up on the subtleties that other people are just simply not able to see. That's why an artist is able to do some of the things that they do. Look, there's other things that play roles in there, but by definition, they have to be sensitivity to have a level of sensitivity to see the differences in things. Creativity, there you go, I've talked about it. And rich inner worlds. Yeah, I have a rich inner world when my life is aligned and I'm in flow and I'm feeling brilliant. There's like this vast open depth within inside me. Now the flip side's also true. I can't remember what I've written down as the struggles, but we're going to get to them. The flip side of that is also true, which is when things are difficult and dark, there's a deep darkness inside of me that I don't want to go to and that's really hard to go to and can end up leading to kind of really dysfunctional behavior. Strong moral compass, deep values driven. Now, I would argue that a lot of sort of narcissistic, toxic, horrible, emotional, abusive people also have high level of sensitivity. But what they do with that sensitivity is they use it entirely for their own gain. So I think there's two ends of the spectrum, right? We tend to use it in self-abandonment, and they use it for their own gain. Now, as awful as this is, there is some similarities in that, right? A toxic, horrible, narcissistic person cares about themselves and is trying to make themselves win. When you self-abandonment, you are doing that for yourself. But the big difference here is that they're doing it solely for themselves without the care for other people. We're over here sort of abandoning ourselves, trying to get ourselves loved through the love and care for other people. So they are different. But you can see that the sensitivity is there in both of them. And then the ability to notice subtle details, body languages, tone shifts. And again, I'll put that down as a strength because it's really good when you're trying to hold space for people, when you're, when I'm really deeply listening to people and they say something and I think, you've said that, but clearly I'm picking up on that's not what you're feeling. That's not what, and that's why, by the way, small talk as a highly sensitive person becomes so exhausting because you can be in a group of like 5 or 6 people and like there's one guy's like, yeah, it was a great day, feeling really good. And you're like, no, you're not. I can tell that you fucking hate yourself and you're acting like it's amazing. And then so that can become exhausting because you have to switch off for that because it's not your job or duty to tell them, right? And ideally, you'd rather just not pick up on it in those moments. And that kind of leads on, which I'm going to talk to you about, is empath. This term comes up a lot. When I found the term empath, I think I found it similar sort of time as highly sensitive person. I may have found it a little bit after. And I was like, fuck, man, yeah, I'm an empath. When you look at the people talk about being overly in tune with other people and not being able to get away from that, not being able to escape it, and people talk about that. The more and more that I look into the definition of empath, and let's get just a quick Google definition of empath, right? Empath definition. A person with paranormal... No, we want the spiritual definition. A person who is highly attuned to the energies and the emotions of those around them may be considered to be an empath. Empaths are said to feel what others are feeling so deeply that they absorb or take on the emotions themselves, often at the expense of their own emotional well-being. So what I would argue is, when we take that definition, often at the expense of their own emotional well-being, I would argue that an empath is just a highly sensitive person who has a struggle with boundaries. And that's what I realized I was. I was like, oh, it's just because I'm an empath, when I go into a busy environment, I'm just an empath, so I just absorb everything, and it's horrible and it's overwhelming. But actually, when I start to learn to be able to, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, how we might do this. When I learn to separate myself from them and stop taking responsibilities for other people's emotions, when I start to lay boundaries, well, then all of a sudden I'm not an empath again. So again, when we look at that definition, if I start to lay boundaries and then I stop taking on the emotions of other people at the expense of my own emotional well-being, then I'm not an empath anymore, am I? And I think that's the key thing. So I would encourage you, I still resonate with the term empath. I'm not saying don't use the term. And again, remember what I said at the beginning, just because I have an opinion on something, it doesn't mean that I'm attacking your opinion or making your opinion wrong. But how does that land with you? Because in the end, I just stopped saying I'm an empath. And whenever I felt like I was an empath, I felt like there's more that I could do. Now, I would also argue and caveat that by saying there's still definitely times when I feel very much like an empath. I think and that's because, that's because I feel very much like an empath in the areas of my life where I find boundaries really difficult to lay. Wherever I feel like an empath, there's nearly always a boundary I'm struggling to lay emotionally. When I lay that boundary, I stop being an empath and I become a highly sensitive person again. So in that respect, I would really challenge you to go, are you an empath? Or do you need to do some work on boundaries? Now, that's not your fault. That's not to say, it's fucking your fault you're an empath, right? It's more to say, actually, can we take our power back somewhere? And how do we do that? So how do we separate, I did want to go through the struggles. How do we separate our bodies? And how have I begun to lay boundaries so I feel less like an empath? I would say that breathwork has become so important to me. And the reason that breathwork has become so important to me is because it helps me be in my body. If I don't know where my body ends and your body starts in terms of the ways that I feel, how the fuck am I ever going to lay a boundary? And I think that you need to start there. And I think that people don't realize that. People don't realize that they don't know where their body ends and the next person's body starts, right? The more I'm in tune, the more I get in touch with my body, yeah? This is my body. This is my body. How do I feel? How do I feel right now in my body, right? How do I feel? Shaking it around, feeling it. This is why somatic work becomes, okay, I'm in my body. What do I feel at the moment? All right? What do I feel at the moment? That has to be my starting place. Once I start to get better at understanding what I'm feeling, then I can start to better judge the emotions that I pick up on. Okay, what am I picking up on here? Right, I get the sense that I can feel this person is overwhelmed. Is this my responsibility? By the way, if they're not your friend and it's a social experience, it ain't your responsibility. You don't have to save everybody. It's not your responsibility to save everybody. You can't walk into a room, a social event that has fucking however many in, let's say it's got 50 in, and realize that this person over there don't want to be here in terms of their life and that they're really struggling, you can't and won't and don't have the ability to be able to save everybody. I mean, who the hell am I to think that I could anyway? So then I have to disconnect. That's not mine. Now, if it's a friend, am I in the right situation? Do I want to reflect back to them? What do I want to do with that? How am I best placed to do something with that emotion if I do want to support them in it? But ultimately, you have to come back to let people have their experience. Let people have their emotions. Know that you are a space if people want to come to you. What you probably find is some people subconsciously recognize your sensitivity, and so you draw them in, and so they come to you all of the time. When I look at like my social media over the years, right? When I first started out creating social media and had a few hundred followers on Instagram, and then for a couple of years, I think I had like around 1,000. If somebody came to me, shared their experience, I could read it, be with it, hear it. Now, I just can't do that, right? I can't emotionally lean into everybody's experiences all of the time. So there's that. So then what does that mean for when we're holding space and when we are trying to be with people? Let me make this really clear, because I think people get it wrong, right? Why do we say hold space? I don't think people realize why we say hold space. We hold space. I'm holding space for you because I'm not holding your emotions. Your emotions are not mine to hold. The only people on the planet whose emotions I would ever hold are my children while they're children, and I'll probably do it throughout their adulthood as well, rightly or wrongly. But your emotions are not mine to hold. I hold space for you to help you witness your emotions, to help you take responsibility for your emotions. I don't take your emotions on. The moment I start to feel them, the moment I start to take them on, I start to take responsibility. That's not fair on you, and that's not fair on me, and nobody wins. I hold space. I don't hold your emotions. So I stand back. I don't allow myself to feel it. I separate. Okay, I'm feeling that a little bit in my body. I'm feeling your emotions a little bit in my body. Let me give that back a bit. Let me let you have that. Let me witness. It's not mine to hold. It's not mine to take on. The better you get at that, the better you get at witnessing, holding the space so that we can witness the emotion together, while letting you take responsibility, the better you are going to be at stopping absorbing this. And this is when then your sensitivity really can start to become your superpower in many ways, although there's still overwhelming aspects and traits of it. One of the best ways to do this, and I'm going to finish on this before I go to the questions, because I think I've gone on quite a while today, although my clock's gone off over there, is learn the power of the breath. I don't mean that in a woo-woo, like stupid way, but learn. You can buy yourself time. Right? I'm with you. I'm witnessing. I'm watching. I'm holding the space to see what you're feeling. I'm calming my nervous system. I'm regulating my nervous system regularly. This is not mine to feel. This is not mine to take on. This is not mine to take responsibility for. All right? I learned that by using the somatic work, using the breath work, being in my body. I'm in my body. My feelings are my feelings. Your feelings are your feelings. And so I know that you may be listening to that and thinking, well, you've sort of said a whole lot of nothing in that kind of how do we hold space thing. But if you're an intuitive person, you start to lean into the things that I'm saying to you there, that will start to make sense to you. It really will start to make sense to you. So let me summarize on the highly sensitive thing before we get into the questions, because there's a couple of them. I might do one or maybe two. My sensitivity was the bane of my life when I was a child. In Western culture, I think we still think that it's a weakness that you need to bump out of people. People try to metaphorically beat it out of me, both in school and probably to a degree at home. I tried to do that in myself. It's not easy to be with somebody like me who is emotionally overwhelmed a lot. I have to disconnect from my body a lot. I find the world loud and overstimulating often. And so there are lots of struggles that are still there, even as somebody who is quite good at looking after myself in that respect. But I'm able to do the work that I do today, having worked on myself as much as I can to kind of really lean into and be with my sensitivity to help it become a real positive trait. Something that, it is the bane of my life still in some regards. It still is, the weight is still sometimes heavy, but it is my greatest gift. If I had to tell you my favorite attribute about myself, I would tell you it was my sensitivity. If you asked me what my biggest trait that I struggle with in my life, I would also tell you my sensitivity. Maybe that's the best way to summarize it. So let's get into these questions. Where there was one. This question, it was worded like this. What if I secretly wish they would just disappear from my life? And I'm going to say something even deeper. Whether you got a toxic parent, alcoholic parent, addicted parent, there are going to be times in your life when you do think to yourself, I wish they were just dead. My life would be easier if they just died. And then that is normally followed by a sense of guilt and like, fuck, I must be the horrible one here. How could I think that about somebody? Like, what does that say about me? But I totally understand why you might feel that. I totally understand why it come in. It makes perfect sense. If you've got a toxic and abusive parent, it makes perfect sense that you would hope that, maybe, dare I even say, wish that. If you have an alcoholic parent who might not be a toxic person, but repeatedly breaks your heart every time they do that, it makes sense that you would think that. You don't have to think things like this entirely, neither, by the way. You can have a part of yourself that wishes that and a part of yourself that doesn't want to wish that. But I hope if you do think that and feel that you have a space to be able to speak to that and talk about that in front of people that understand and get it. And don't go, fucking hell, you can't think and feel that. I need to make you think and feel something different and come away from that. We feel a range of emotions, sometimes contradicting, sometimes opposing. Two truths can be true when it comes to our emotions. So just understand that. And by the way, I'll say it because I know nobody else will. If your parent is toxic and abusive to you all of the time, never changes and never does change, it's no wonder that you feel like that. It's no wonder that you feel like that. And I'm sorry that you live in a society, in a world that doesn't have the strength and the courage to hold that for you and say, you know what, that makes sense. And then the second question I'm going to do is, there was another deeper one, but I don't think I've got enough time to answer it. All right, let's do it. What if I'm actually just being dramatic and they weren't actually that bad? Look, do I think that there are adult children out there who are being dramatic and overvaluing how bad it was? Maybe. I don't think anybody's being dramatic. If you're genuinely working on yourself and you're genuinely looking at your experiences, I tell you to trust your body. Listen to your body. What do you think? What do you feel? What's true in your heart? I trust you. Trust your heart. Trust your body. I think deep down you know. I think if you're asking, am I being too dramatic? There may even be a part of you that hopes that you are. Because maybe that would be another route to allowing yourself to have the parent that you wish that you had and that you've never had. So it makes sense that you're trying to take blame again in a different way. You've probably had that pushed on you your whole life that you're being dramatic. Listen to your heart. Listen to your body. Trust yourself. I trust you. There are people out there that understand and trust you too. And hopefully deep down you know. All right. Let's take one deep breath. My body, my feelings. Yeah, man. I've enjoyed this today. I was really enjoyed it, in fact. And aside from that enjoyment, we know one thing that is always true here on this podcast, and that is that I have been Josh. I fucked it up. Is that the first time ever? Episode 17. I am Josh Connolly, and this has definitely been dysfunctional. I did tell you it would be dysfunctional, so thank you for sticking around till the end here. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please help me to grow Dysfunctional by sharing with your friends on social media. You can find me at Josh_FFW. And then wherever you're listening to this or watching this, please make sure that you've liked and subscribed, left us a 5-star review and a comment if your platform allows it. And I'll see you on the next one.